welcome back to the second part of our tutorial. I am going to be leaving this part separate, but I'm also going to be joining it with part 1 and creating one large tutorial. So, depending on whether you're watching part 2 or the join, either way, welcome back. So, I have finished the foot of my sock and I'm getting ready to start the heel short row shaping. But before I do that, I always like to close off the Kitchener. Okay. So, if you have your waste yarn in here, this is going to be perfect because it's going to hold the stitches up and you know exactly where to start when you start pulling the stitches. So the first thing you want to do is you want to look for your tail. So this is the tail from our original cast on. So we want to start on the opposite side of the loom. So right here you see how the sock yarn is wrapped around this waste yarn. That is perfect. That's exactly what we want. So then from there, I kind of put my fingers in through some of these little yarns. And you just want to try to find the very first one. And then you're going to start pulling it. And a way to know that you're pulling in the right direction is because you don't want the loop next to it to tighten down. You want it to be the opposite. So if you start pulling loosely and the one next to it starts tightening down, then pull on the opposite side. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so this one is ready. And I know that because I pre-started it. So I'm going to go to my next one and I'm just going to lightly tug. See how that loop is starting to work its way down? That's what we want to do. And you don't want to pull extremely tight. You just want to kind of, let me go from this side. You just kind of want to pull it a little bit. Because these stitches are going to tighten up the further you go down, okay? And your yarn loop, if you will start to get bigger and bigger. So now we're going to our next loop. So see how that one's tightening down. Bring it over here to the side. Like I said, you can put your fingers through here if you want, so you can kind of see which yarn's next. You grab that next one and you just pull it down a little bit. Don't worry, like I said, don't worry about it being too tight because that will come out. If the stitches are loose, it will come out when you block your sock. Obviously, you want to pull it enough to where there's not a gaping hole. But if you pull it too tight, then it's going to make a line and it's going to kind of cinch down and you don't want that. Then you grab your next one. Okay, so here, if I pull up here, it's pulling from this side. And we don't want that. We want it to pull from this side. So that means I know that I've got to come down to the bottom and pull. And I will tell you that if you are using a yarn that has any bit of wool in it, you want to be extra careful during this process because the yarn will felt. Definitely will felt. And this takes, you know, a little bit of time and practice and patience. But I feel like it's worth it. It makes such a pretty seamless join in your sock. I don't like the there's like a gathered cast off you can do, and I don't like that on socks. I think it's perfect for hats, but not so much for socks. Okay, so this is what it's looking like. Now you can see a little bit right there because that waist yarn is still in, but once that we pull that out, you're not gonna be able to see it at all. But you see how those stitches are just seamless? So we're gonna continue to do that all the way across. And when we get over here to this other side, I'll show you what to do. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky. So go ahead, rewind the video if you need to, but I'm sure you guys have it. And I'll meet you back in just a minute. Okay, I just wanted to pop back in because I've come to a point that is typical, and I just want to show you what to do. It appears as if this one is the next, but it's not. That's why I like to put my fingers in there so that I can kind of base. See, because if I pull to this one, it's actually pulling this one. And that's not this is not the right loop. So we're gonna pop that back over here on my finger and pull the correct loop. Always watch kind of where your yarn is pulling from, so that way you know that you are on that correct loop. Okay? All right, continue across, and if I run into any more scenarios, I will meet you back. Remember to pull gently and slowly. If this yarn had any wool in it, the way that it is bunching up right here, that would definitely cause it to felt. So just be extra careful and go slow when you are closing it up so that you do not felt your yarn. Now, I know this looks like a heck of a lot of yarn that some people may think is wasteful, because there's a lot here, okay? But what I do with mine is, number one, I save it in case it comes to a point to where I ever need any mending done, or I will save it for scrappy socks. You can do, you know, a couple rows or rounds of different colors in your heels and your toes, or you can add a little pop of color in your cuffs. There's lots of different things that you can do with, you know, that little bit of yarn that's going to be left. So, you know, don't fret. You're really not wasting it. There's many different things that you can do with it. But like I said, if you are using a yarn that does have wool in it, you definitely want to take this time a little bit slower. So we're getting over here towards the end. And before too much longer, these stitches are going to be a little bit harder to see which one goes next. So you just pull it a little bit down to make it a little tighter. I definitely, like I said, like to put my fingers in so I can kind of guide and see which one's next. Maybe not so much towards the middle, but definitely when I'm on either edge, whether it's the starting edge or the ending edge. Just pull that a little bit tight. Like I said, not real tight, but taut. I bet you didn't think that it was going to be this easy, did you? I know the first time I seen one of these being demonstrated, this closing, I was like, oh yeah, no way. No way in the world can I do that. And here I am. Not so many months later, showing you guys how to do it. So yeah, it's really, truly, really is easy to do. I mean, I understand that it's going to take some time to get it down because it, you know, it was like that for me. Oh, see, so I just pulled that stitch down. So what I like to do, excuse my arm reach, what I like to do in a situation like that, just to make sure that I'm grabbing the correct one, because sometimes it'll go down tighter, I will just take my loom tool and grab that loop and pull it back up, just enough to where I can get my fingers underneath it without tugging it, and continue to cast off or close up the Kitchener stitch. There we go. Figure out where I'm at here because my loop, there we go. My loop closed up on me there. Okay, so you got two big loops. What do I do? Well, feed them through so that they're going in the correct direction. And just start closing that off, because you know you always want to close off the loop in the direction that you're working from. So if you are right-handed, you're going to be like I am, you're going to be closing off from right to left, and if you're left-handed, you're going to be closing off from left to right. And it's still the same concept no matter which hand is your dominant hand. You just kind of follow the loops. And there's a lot more yarn, like I said, to play with once it gets down here. And I just kind of, every so often, just kind of pull it so it doesn't create a huge knot. And I think, like I said, that's just because I typically use yarn with wool in it. So it's just something that I've learned to do over the years so that it doesn't felt on me. Because the friction of pulling the yarn through these stitches to close them off is what will cause it to felt. So, like I said, just be gentle. Take that extra few minutes to do what you need to do. All right. I will be back when we get over here to this last section. Okay, so when you get over here to the end, You just want to be mindful that you are pulling, like I said, the right loop. Because sometimes it's easier to get the wrong loop and it will close off a stitch that you don't want to be closed off. So I just kind of pull these stitches apart. I can tell which one's next. And again, just, you know, ever so gently pull that yarn. And it is a little bit more, I wouldn't say harder, and I wouldn't even say tedious. Cumbersome maybe, because your yarn is getting longer. Now, you don't want to cut the yarn. You definitely do not want to cut the yarn. I know it's a longer tail, but you definitely don't want to cut it, because then what you're going to do is not be able to close those stitches off. So just go really, really, really slow and close those off. Like I said, it does get a little bit more cumbersome down here in this area because you've got a lot of yarn you're working with, and it's easier for it to wind up on itself or knot up like it's doing right here. Okay, looks like we got a couple more here. And it's going to be a little bit tighter down here at the other end when you're pulling it through, and that's just because you're down here at the end of your toe shaping and you've got that waist yarn in there. So it's going to be a little bit harder to pull, but still try to do it as gently as you can so that you don't felt and so you get that stitch closed off. Okay, so when you get down here to the other end, a way to tell if you have any stitches left to close off is to pull this working yarn, okay? Or your tail, rather. If that loop does not close off, then you know that there's another stitch in there that you need to pull, okay? And unfortunately, because this is did a color change right here, it's a little bit harder to see. So then at that point, that's when I start using my loom tool and gently pull till I find the right one. You don't want to pull too much because you don't want to create a hole. All right. And I will tell you that sometimes you will pull the wrong one at the end. And if you do, that's fine. Don't panic. You just take it and pull it the opposite direction. Just pull it back out the way you just pulled it in. So we're not there yet. And you also want to be mindful when you're pulling up this yarn that you watch this tail, because you don't want to pull it out, okay? Sorry, that you don't. You want to watch your tail because you want to make sure that it's not coming out. Okay, so let me zoom in here for you. When you get down here to this last little bit, the stitches are going to look funky. So you just got to kind of play with your loom hook. Like I said, go really gently because you don't want to create holes, and just lightly tug at one of those stitches. And if it gives way very easily like that just did, then you know you are on the correct stitch. All right. Now, let's see if we're ready to pull that tail yet. Not yet. So there's another stitch in there. And you can kind of tell when you pull the tail where it is. Like I said, just use your loom hook and just ever so slightly pull that loop up. See, so it's pulling from here, but this is also pulling my tail. So I can tell that that's my last stitch. I'm just gonna kind of hold on to that tail because you definitely don't want to pull that out. Definitely don't want to pull that out. Finish that up. Make sure you close it off really good. All right, and from here, we're gonna pull our tail that was from our beginning yarn when we cast it on in the very, very beginning. And when it gets to a certain point, I will feed that tail back through a loop just for securing purposes. Tighten that down. And then you're going to take a darning needle and just push that yarn through the inside, and it cinches off even better. Okay, so now we're going to take our waste yarn and we're just going to pull it out. Okay? So now you just want to stretch it out just a little bit. And like I said, when you block it, all of this will seam itself back up. But there you have it. You have closed off your toe. And if you're still with me and you've done that, congratulations, you now have a toe on a sock. So from here, what you would do is start your short row shaping again, the same way you did for the toe of your sock. Okay, your working yarn's over here. Except for this time, what we're gonna do is we're gonna work all the way over here. We're gonna wrap and turn this peg and then keep going back and forth like you did for the toe until you have 2 loops on each of those pegs. And then you are going to do your increases back out, okay? I will insert a clip here of how we did the toe because it is exactly the same as the heel. Exactly the same, okay? So I'll insert that clip here and I will meet you back. Okay, I did want to mention something real quick before I send you back to the short row shaping clip that we did for the toe. You're going to do the same exact thing for the heel that you did for the toe with one exception. And that exception is when you get to the point on your increases where you have 2 loops on this marked peg and 2 loops on your beginning of round marked peg, at that point I want you to start working in the rounds. So if you have knitted back to this one and it had 2 and you knitted this and you come this way and this one has 2, just treat that 2 as 1 and go all the way back around and then pick up the 2 on the other side. What that's going to do is stop any holes that you may get on the side of the sock from the short row shapings of the heel. That is the only difference. If you guys need me to do a separate video for that part, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to insert the clip for the short row shapings that we did for the toe. And that step right there is the only difference. Now, from here, what we're going to do is start our short row shaping for our toe. For right-handed, we are going to start, we're going to knit all the way from our beginning of round marked peg all the way over to our halfway point peg, the one right before it. When we get to this peg, I'm going to show you how to do the wrap and turn. If you're on left-handed, your stitch markers should be on the opposite side, which in that case, you would be knitting all the way to this peg. And if they're not, that's okay. If you have not, if you're left-handed and you have not put them on the side, then you can just work it the opposite way. Just knit all the way over to this peg and then start your short row shapings, meaning you would knit all the way around actually to your first beginning peg, and then we were just going to knit back and forth. It may be a little awkward for you being left-handed, but I promise it's going to do the same thing. So, what we're going to do now is we are going to knit all the way back to the opposite side of our loom to the peg right before our marked peg. You don't have to hold your yarn really tight. You just kind of want to hold it taut. If you hold it too tight, especially when you're doing socks, you have the chance of taking the stretch out of the yarn. And you definitely don't want to do that, because you want that bounce back that the sock yarn gives you. Because when you knit socks, you actually knit them with negative ease, so that way they actually stretch to form to your foot, and they don't, you know, slouch down and fall off as you walk, or fall off in your shoe, that kind of thing. So we're almost around to this peg. Once you guys get the hang of it, you'll definitely be able to go a lot faster, and you'll find your rhythm and a good way to hold your loom. I don't normally hold my loom like this when I am knitting a sock, but in order to get a good tutorial for you guys, I'm having to adapt a little bit of how I would normally work. So, hopefully, this all stays in camera view for you, and you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so we're gonna knit this last peg before our marked peg. You're gonna bring your working yarn between the peg that you just worked and the next peg, and this is gonna be the same way for all of these pegs that you're gonna wrap. You're gonna pick that loop up with your loom hook going down from the top, lift that off and kind of hold it to the back. You're gonna take that working yarn, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna put it between the peg and that loop. So that way the yarn is wrapped behind that peg. And we're gonna pop that loop back on. So now we have wrapped it. Now we're gonna turn it by just going back and knitting in the opposite direction. Sometimes you gotta finagle that first one right there, because you know you've got your two loops and the yarn's not really wanting to go where it's supposed to. So now we're gonna knit all the way back to the other side, and we're gonna wrap and turn our peg that is marked as the beginning of our round. You would do the same thing if you are left-handed. You're just going in the opposite direction. Again, you don't want to do this too tight. You just kind of want your yarn to lay on there. Let your fingers just kind of loosely hold the yarn, especially with the sock yarn. Okay, knit all the way back until the peg before your next marked peg, and we'll wrap and turn again. Okay, we've knit all the way back around to the peg before our marker that marks the beginning of our round. We're gonna do the same thing we did on the other side. We're gonna bring that working yarn in between those two pegs. We're gonna take our loom tool. We're gonna pop that loop off, making sure that you grab all the strands. Put that working yarn behind that peg and in between that loop. Pop that loop back on, and now it is securely wrapped around the peg. Now we're gonna go back and do the same thing, but this time we're gonna stop one before the two. So what I mean by that is we're gonna knit all the way back to this peg. We're gonna wrap and turn this peg. Then we're gonna go back in this direction. We'll wrap and turn this one. Then we'll go back and wrap and turn the next one. We're gonna keep going back and forth, wrapping and turning each peg until you have two loops from this marked peg to this marked peg, and this marked peg to this one. So continue working on those wraps and turns, and I will show you what to do next. Okay, so we're almost back here to our other side, and I just wanted to show you again how to do that wrap and turn. So I know that this is my last knit stitch because this one has 2 on it. So I know I need to wrap and turn that next peg. So I'm gonna bring that working yarn in between those 2 pegs, pop that loop off, bring that working yarn behind, and pop that loop back on the peg. And then we're gonna knit back this way. And a way to know if you lay your loom down and you're in the middle of your decreases or your increases, a good way to know which direction, like say you're over here in the middle somewhere, a good way to know which direction you're going is to count. So say I stop right here on this round. I can look back in here and say, oh, you know what? I've got 2 loops right here that are wrapped, and I've only got 1 on this side, so I know I'm going in this direction. And the same thing goes for the increases in back. You just count to see which side has more or less, and that will help you determine which direction you are going when you're doing your short row shapings. So continue to do that until you have 2 loops from here to here and from here to here, and then I will show you how to do the increases. Okay, so I have wrapped my last peg, and a good way to verify, just to make sure before you go any further, is that you have 2 loops on each peg from here to this marked stitch and from here to this marked stitch. And you know this last one is ready because the yarn is going in the opposite direction. Now, right now, you should have some kind of like half crescent shaped right there. So now we're going to start the increases, which is going to be the exact opposite of what we just did. So now we are going to knit back to our first peg that has 2 loops on it. Again, right at this point, you still don't need to be holding the yarn too tight. You just want it to be taut. And like I said, you'll find a rhythm which works best for you. Once you get the hang of it, you'll be flying through these socks in no time. All right, 2 more to go. 1 and 2. Okay, so our next peg right here has 2 loops on the hook. We got 1 and 2. So what we are going to do is we're going to take that yarn, we're going to bring it to the front, we're going to wrap it around that peg and go back this direction, okay? So the yarn is now going back in the opposite direction, and we're going to treat those 2 loops that are on that peg as one. And we are just going to pop those over. Now, sometimes if it's really tight, you may have to do 1 loop at a time. And if you have to do that, that is completely fine. Now, this is the only time that you'll want to make sure that you pull it tight, because when you pull it tight, those little stitches kind of move over here to the side, and that will cut down on any holes in your short row shaping, okay? So from here, we are going to knit back in the opposite direction because now we're increasing. And this next one is going to be a little tighter because we did pull this one a little bit tight. Sorry, I got out of the camera there. And so we're just going to knit back. I'm trying to go a lot slower than I normally would so that I can show you guys exactly what to do. I'm sorry, I keep sliding out of the camera there. Let me back this out a little bit so I can stay in camera for you guys. Now see, if you pull these stitches too tight, it's going to be harder for you to knit them off. So you definitely just want to kind of guide that yarn over the top. All right. So that stitch almost slipped off. I was able to save it. I don't know if you caught that or not. All right, so we're back to our March peg. That's the first one that has the 2 loops on it. Again, we're going to take it from the front, wrap it around the back, knit those 2 loops off. Okay, so I want to show you a little closer of what happens when you actually pull that stitch. So you see the yarn right now. Watch what happens when I pull that stitch tight. You see how it kind of turns around over here to the front? That's exactly what you want it to do. So now you're just going to knit back until your next one that has 2 loops on it. Wrap and turn, wrap and turn, wrap and turn, so all the way back and forth until you have worked all of the 2 loops off of your loom. And when you do that, we will be back to do the next part. Okay, welcome back. I know by now you should have your heel shaping done. I have switched socks because the sock is in an actual spot of where we need to be for our tutorial to continue. So that way I can get it out quicker for you guys. Once you have done your heel, it should look something like this. So if you look at it, it does look exactly like a toe. They're mirror images of each other. Okay. From this point, you are going to work in the round the amount of times that you have determined for the leg of your sock. I don't like really, really high socks. I kind of like between shorty and medium. So with this particular yarn, and I did write it down so that I could show you, because like I said in the beginning of this tutorial, it does not have wool in it, so it's a little bit tighter of a stitch. I did 60 rounds for the leg, and for the cuff I'm gonna do a knit purl rib for 20 rounds. So now I'm gonna show you how to do the knit and the purl cuff. You guys should already be pro at how to do the knit stitch because we've been doing it the whole time. But just in case, you're going to bring your working yarn in front of the peg on top of the loop and just pop that loop over. So our next stitch is going to be a purl stitch, which we have not done yet. Your working yarn is going to go below the loop that is on the peg. You're going to bring your loom hook down through that loop, and you're going to turn it and scoop that loop up. You're going to pop that off the peg and put the loop right back on. Next stitch will be a knit and then a purl. Your working yarn below, put your hook through the loop going down, bring that loop up, pop it off, put it back on the loom. Knit, and I'll show you a purl again. Again, your working yarn is below the loop that is on the peg. Bring that loom hook through going down and flip it and pull that loop up. Pop that loop off the peg and then pop her back on. And that is how you do the knit one, purl one rib. We're going to do that. Well, I'm going to do that for 20 rows. You can definitely do it more or less. I would suggest a minimum of 10, just to give your sock a little bit of bounce back. But do that for the amount of rows or rounds that you want. And then when you're done with that, I will show you guys how to do the bind off. Okay, so I've done my rib, and now it is time to cast off. So what we're gonna do, and we're just gonna do a simple stretchy cast off. We're gonna wrap the yarn around our loom 3 times. Now don't pull it tight, but 3 times. And then we are just gonna always go a little bit further just for argument's sake. Cut our yarn. So we've ended our round here. Okay, we're gonna skip our next peg, which would be the beginning of our round, and we're gonna go to the peg next to it. If you are left-handed, you'll go in this direction. So if you are left-handed, you will actually skip. Let me pull that yarn back up here. If you're left-handed, you are going to skip this peg. You're going to start here and then go back to this one, okay? So, right-handed, our yarn is coming from the peg that our last peg worked. Our next peg is our marked peg for beginning of round. The beginning of round peg is what we're going to skip. We're going to bring that yarn to the front, okay? We want the yarn to be below it, so below the stitch that is on the peg. We're going to put that loom tool through it, and we're going to pull it up, okay? So let me pull this out and I'll show you. You got a lot of yarn here in the beginning, but so the tail is actually coming up through the stitch, okay? So then we're going to go back to the one that we skipped. And this one we want to come down. So we're going to bring our loom hook through the bottom of the stitch. And we're going to grab that working yarn and we're going to pull it down. Now we're going to go back. We've got the yarn coming from this one, so we're going to skip this one and go to this one. We want it to come from up. So we're going to put our loom hook down, bring the yarn up. We go back to the one that we just skipped, and this one we want to come down. So this one is going to be above those stitches. So just put your loom hook through the 2 stitches that are on the peg. Grab that tail and pull it down. And we're going to continue to do that all the way around the loom. So you skip your next peg and you go up. The one that you skipped, you go down. You skip 2, go up, down, all the way around until you get to the other side. Okay, we're almost back over here to the other side. We're almost finished. And if you have enough tail yarn, that's why I like to go around the loom at least 3 times. You're definitely gonna have extra, but I like to give myself that wiggle room so I'm not having to pull this too tight. But what I do here is, see, I've got 2 left. I've got my last peg of the round, and then I've got my first peg of the round. And my yarn is coming between these 2 pegs. I still will go around and come back up with this first peg of the round, the first one that we actually worked with, and do the same technique of the cast off. It's okay if you've got to go 1 stitch further. And the reason I like to do that is because I feel like it gives it just a little bit more of a secure bind off. Okay, and you can still go 1 pass further, and I will do that just to show you that it is completely okay. It's not gonna make the bind off any tighter. It's kind of awkward for me to hold the loom at this angle, but I want you guys to be able to see what I'm doing. And it is a rainy, gloomy day here, so if you hear my puppies in the background, I am sorry. But I can't have them outside today. All right, last stitch here. Now, the fun part. Just anywhere you want. I usually start at the opposite end of the cast on. Just start popping those loops off the hook, off the loom rather. Go, I mean, you can go fast. The more loops that you have off, the easier it's gonna be. Like, really, you know, don't tug to it because you don't want to break the yarn or whatever, but see how easy those just pop right off. This is the fun part. That means you're done. It means you're done. My intentions were just to make this a video tutorial, but I have had a couple people ask if I would write up the pattern for it as well. So I will be working on that over the next week or so. I will probably post it on my blog, but I will pin it in the comments below on the second half as well as the merged video so that you guys can see it when it's done. Okay, so our sock is off the loom, and you're probably thinking, holy cannoli, that just looks crazy. Let me give you just a little tip. You can actually tug to these stitches. I'm going to come up a little bit closer so you see what happens. Just lightly tug to it. You see what's happening? Those stitches are tightening down just like they will here. They are here. And you're going to have a nice cuff. Now, it does still look a little wonky, but like I said, it's going to need to be blocked. And you want it to be a little stretchy because honestly, you want it to be able to get on your foot. But that, my friends, is the recipe on how you do toe up socks on the loom. It's gonna look a little bit different than this if you are using wool, like I said, because this doesn't have the same stretchability as wool socks would. So your cuff is definitely gonna look different if you're using a wool blend than it does here. From there, you just kind of weave in your ends and voila. You are done. Congratulations on doing a toe up sock on the loom. And until next time, guys, happy knitting, happy crocheting, and happy looming. Bye.